Alrighty, good evening, everyone. It's your host, Nevin Gusak, with host of New Ideas. With me is geopolitical analyst and author, Jeff Nyquist. We're going to be talking about the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the ripple effect uh, in American politics and American discourse and the national security implications of it. How are we doing today, Jeff?
Well, it's a sad day. Yesterday, Charlie Kirk was assassinated about 20 minutes after noon in Utah at a university campus by someone who appears to be a pro-Antifa, pro-transgender. We've had a bunch of violence lately in mass shootings from transgenders. Don't know if this guy is. And then we have a peculiar reaction from some people on the right and the left. And we have the Russians jumping all over it, trying to widen the breach in American society, probably jubilant that this act of violence has disturbed the peace of our republic. How do you read that, Nevin?
Yeah, many similarities. I mean, there's been an uptick in political violence and assassinations. In Minnesota, you had state Democratic lawmakers. You had the attack against Paul Pelosi with a hammer, which elements of the right, including I think it was Donald Trump Jr., kind of making fun of and posting on X with a picture of a hammer and saying, "This is my Paul Pelosi Halloween costume." And then you have people on the far left hailing the assassination of CEO, United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, correct me if I'm getting his name wrong, and many people, whatever your criticisms of the private health insurance industry, really showing a really ugly face of anti-capitalism. And then and that has, of course, national security implications that you and I would agree upon. And then you have, again, the assassination, rather brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk, who was the father of two children. He, whether you agree with his politics or not, he did build an empire too as well, obviously in cooperation with a lot of other conservative personalities and donors. And he was brutally attacked. So the blood shooting from his neck, at least that's how it was described.
I saw it. I saw the video before it was taken down, and it was one of the most brutal killings of a person publicly that I've ever seen in my life. And I was alive when President Kennedy was shot, and of course RFK was shot when I was 10 years old, and of course Martin Luther King. The 60s was a violent decade. You had besides Martin Luther King, you had Malcolm X also being assassinated. You had a lot of assassinations. And in the 60s, and we are entering this kind of unstable period once again. American society is becoming volatile, and this volatility is, coming. I mean, I hate to note this, but both Lee Harvey Oswald and Sirhan Sirhan were communists. I don't know about James Earl Ray and Martin Luther King. I assume James Earl Ray was a right-wing type. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, well, with Lee Harvey Oswald was a communist. I wrote a paper discussing on my Substack Attack by Assassination, where Lee Harvey Oswald had clear ties to the Cubans and the Soviets. You take a look at Sirhan Sirhan. He was a pro-PLO, pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, Marxist. So that was clearly, and what we see today, as you mentioned, it's believed that on the bullets of Charlie Kirk's assassin engraved were pro-transgender, pro-Antifa slogans. Now, you and I are anti-fascists by the actual definition, but the Maoist elements of Antifa are authoritarian or totalitarian, just like fascists, to make that very clear. But sometimes words have meaning or don't have meaning with people. When somebody says things Antifa or anti-fascist, oh, they're anti-fascist, great. They're against totalitarianism. So I want to throw that out there.
Yeah, well, there's abuse of the word fascist, and we know this abuse is that everybody's a fascist who's not a communist. This is the kind of way this word is used. So we need to be careful. Those of us who are normies, so to speak, and I would count Charlie Kirk as a normie. He's not far right. That's ridiculous. I don't agree. I did not agree with Charlie Kirk's stand on Russia and Ukraine. I thought he was completely off base on that. But I mean, this is a family man. He's supporting family values. He's supporting certain aspects of old-fashioned conservatism. My dad gave money to his organization, and my dad was really thrilled by it as a guy from an older generation. My dad passed away a couple of years back. He was in his 90s, but that is Charlie Kirk was really old-fashioned and appealed to these older values. And to see some punk of the left, Antifa, do this. Antifa has gotten away with much too much violence on campuses, and we have not come to grips with the fact that the language of the violent revolution and the teaching of nihilistic ideas that are open to violence on campuses, the studying of Karl Marx, of Lenin, of other violent revolutionaries, and the whitewashing of their history on campuses has not been fully understood by the American people. And the implications here are obvious. You are sowing dragon's teeth, ladies and gentlemen, and now you have dragons that are murdering people in the most horrible way, people who are merely using their freedom of speech to argue passionately for their views in a republic. When this cannot be done anymore, the republic is over, and we're headed for Caesarism. And as much as the left complains and claims that Trump is a dictator, what do you expect if you have your people behaving like this?
Well, and there are definitely portions of the revolutionary left, along with the Russians and possibly the Chinese, that are just lapping this up. And let me give you an example. There's an account on X, and he has a YouTube channel called Black Red Guard. And it's a Stalinist Maoist account, thousands of subscribers, thousands too many, in my opinion.
Well, what do you mean by a Stalinist Maoist account?
Basically, a hardline Marxist-Leninist psychopath, essentially. That's my crude way of putting it. So he says right after the assassination, well, guess he lost the debate. Let that sink in, everybody. A man with thousands of accounts.
A bullet is a debating point. A bullet to the neck is a debating point.
So I think let it sink in the audience.
Mm-hmm.
The implication of such a statement and the cruelty behind it, because basically, look, I did an AI search one time about myself, and I'm called a fierce communist. These people
they called you a communist?
No, a fierce anti-communist.
Fierce anti-communist. Okay,
that's a term, and you would qualify Trevor Loudon and others. They would basically put bullets in our necks based on our published writings and speaking. So let that sink in. There are transgenders, by the way, like Brianna Wu, who are very anti-communist and has gotten so much crap from the left against her stands against communism, against PLO, Hamas terrorism and everything. They will also shoot her in the neck. And one of the things I want to implore and impress upon the audience and viewers here is a message of unity, essentially. We all have a common adversary. I'm not saying it's the Russian people or Chinese people or everyone on the left or the right, but we have to pull together as a country, because there are movements as well as governments that are looking this as an opportunity, and to me it's dangerous. Now, there's a gentleman by the name of Danny Haifong, and he writes for Workers' World Party. He has very close ties with China. He's very pro-Russia, very pro-Hamas, the whole 9 yards. Very well known in pro-communist circles. He says, U.S. politicians of all stripes are saying political violence has no place in our country after Charlie Kirk's murder. Wrong. Just look at what the US and Israel have done to Gaza, Iran, Lebanon, and Yemen. Political assassination is baked into the very fabric of US empire. Let that sink in. This is a diversion he's doing purposely away from.
He's justifying the killing of Charlie Kirk because in American foreign policy, we use force against pirates, people who attack ships at sea, people who bomb innocent people. We use violence against them because what else are you going to do? They won't talk to you. They won't cooperate. They'll continue to kill innocent people. So internationally, we have to do this, but he's on the side of the violent people, this guy.
Correct.
He's on the side of them. And so he's really justifying the murder of Charlie Kirk. And he's basically saying, yeah, it's open season on you American empire people, as if America's an empire. It's a republic, excuse me. And the fact that we, I appeal to Baudin, the French political theorist, that there are legitimate states and there are illegitimate ones led by pirates and robbers. And using force against the pirates and robbers, that's what government does. It's maintaining lawful order. And these people, they think there's something wrong with lawful order. They want to destroy it. They want to smash it because they're going to be the little gods that are going to set up their own order. Well, you punks, society's going to end up coming for you punks. And you can kill as many people like me or Charlie Kirk or Nevin as you want, but society's going to come and get you. You're not going to have your revolution in this country. You're not going to prevail here as you have in China and Russia, where real criminals and psychopaths have taken over. You guys are so crazy, you can't take over the whole world. You'll eat your own first. Never give in to these people.
Yeah, so they basically want to create their own dictatorships, and they're obfuscating with that. I mean, you can critique U.S. policy and that of our allies, but what do they have to offer? They offer a globalized tyrannical alternative that's far, far worse than any of the misdeeds, in my opinion, of the U.S. government and whatnot. And I think we have to be very mindful of that.
Yeah, you mentioned the misdeeds of the U.S. government. Look, people say, oh, Nyquist, you say that there's never anything wrong done by your government. You just love your government and everything it does. No, I don't. There's no perfect human institutions. That doesn't mean we have to level them all. What if I said, oh, your family's imperfect, Jeff. You have to go murder them all because they're imperfect. No, that's not a sane approach to life. We're all imperfect. We're all trying, but it's the difference between trying and going completely crazy and murdering people and just going completely outrageous. That's what the murder of Charlie Kirk is. That's what the killing of RFK and JFK and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, that's what that was. And I sure hope they catch this guy.
Oh, I hope so too. And they have to give him the proper punishment. I don't know if I could say it on air because of TOS standards.
Well, that's for the courts to decide. That's for the jury to decide because, and of course, a guy as crazy as this, I mean, how likely is he to be taken alive? And let's hope, they haven't caught him. Are people aiding and abetting him? Has he got co-religionists? And I call it a religion. They're a political part of a political religion, a kind of Gnosticism. I agree with Verglen on that. That they're going to make the perfect world. And the job of man is to make a perfect world, to finish creation, to step into God's shoes, to become God. And that's completely crazy. And it's their philosophy. It's very well articulated, going back by these philosophers, Karl Marx being, one of them. And it's completely wrong. It's completely dangerous. I mean, this is where you get National Socialism, communism, tens of millions of people murdered by their governments when the governments are taken over by these people. They want political power here. And I'm glad to see that people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other people on the left have condemned this. It's very important for them to do that. I just wish Cortez had condemned her DSA colleagues for yucking it up over Trotsky getting ice-picked in the head by Mercader, an assassin sent to Mexico to kill Trotsky by Stalin. I just wish that there would be some consistency here because if we can all agree that violence is a no-go, and that includes, by the way, the violence of the summer of 2020 of burning buildings down, burning billions of dollars worth of property, intimidating people, beating police, and even causing, there were a number of deaths in that uprising. For what? For a drug addict who overdosed on fentanyl and blamed the police and put them in jail? I mean, the police have a really hard job. You're going to intimidate the police. Let's get rid of the police, shall we? And this is supposedly the position of, and she's going to run for president, Ocasio-Cortez. The idea is, oh, we don't need prisons anymore. We need to get rid of them because they're racist. We need to get rid of police because they're racist. I know, not acceptable.
That's nonsense. And
not
usually,
acceptable.
Yeah, that's nonsense. I mean, yeah, DSA overall, they were carrying signs in New York City saying abolish police, abolish borders, abolish profit.
Yeah.
The problem is I don't take what they say seriously, slogans that's sincere, because when that type of authoritarian socialism comes to power, what happens? They don't throw out the profit motive. They have they'll develop their own front companies to, peddle all kinds of slave labor.
That's only that, but you see, you have to take them serious because you have to read the code language of what they're saying. The communists can never, they know from Lenin, oh, well, we don't know how to make a communist economy because, of course, as Ludwig von Mises pointed out, there's no such thing. It's just something Paleolithic, it's Stone Age man, picking up a rock on the ground and making an arrowhead out of it. That's your true socialist economy. The fact is you have to have an advanced society, to have a division of labor, you have to have money, a medium of exchange, you have to have a market. If you don't have that, you can't have an advanced, so you can't even have Roman civilization, you can't have ancient Egypt, you can't have Mesopotamia, you can't have any of it. And the fact is, so they obviously are going to adapt, but they're crazy enough to try to murder people and have experiments and take away people's property and take away their freedom of speech, because as soon as someone like me or you points out, this is crazy, muzzle, gun to the head, we're going to make this utopia. We're going to finish creation. We're going to step into God's shoes. We're the ones that know how to make the world work. And they don't.
Well, let me rephrase it. Yeah, because I wasn't done. Let me rephrase it. The reason why I say I don't take it seriously, I take their intentions seriously, but when they have these highfalutin slogans that may sound good on a very surface level at best.
Do they sound good?
Well, I mean, arguably, to people who really don't know the implications of it, right? Oh, it's going to be wonderful. There's no police, no profit. Everybody's going to live in a land of milk and honey, and everybody's going to be rehabilitated and everything. But we know that in those types of totalitarian societies, there's massive secret police forces. There's block committees on every quarter where if you're a kid or a parent or adult, you say the wrong way, you fart the wrong way, you're dragged off by the police into a slave labor camp or imprisoned or executed. And that's what I mean. You got to take these people seriously, but their rhetoric is really crap. It's like what the Nazis spoke about the Volksgemeinschaft, for example, yet there were people that were more equal in that society itself. And I think the more we bang on the contradictions of the totalitarians, whether of the fascist or national socialist variety or the DSA. And I consider the DSA, I'm sure there are exceptions within the organization, but it has really sailed to the extreme left within the past 10 to 15 years. They're a totalitarian group, just like the Black Red Guard person. That person is an evil totalitarian and whatnot.
Here's a question for you, Nevin. And I agree with you. The DSA is a totalitarian organization whose leadership has shown clear totalitarian inclinations. So for them having sort of been the main support of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she's going to run for president in 2028, does that mean that she's part of this totalitarian edge?
They got pissed at her for not going hardcore against Israel enough, and
but let me ask you, that was only the national leadership. The DSA local chapter there in New York is supporting her whole hog, and it's almost as if the national leadership just said that and then the New York Times comes out with a piece and says, AOC is just a plain old Democrat now. I think they were just helping her move to the center. when they're still supporting her in practice in New York? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, she gave a very vague answer. I found it was,
Isn't that wonderful?
yeah, she gave a vague answer years ago on what her economic structure was be, and that was one of the things that was kind of disturbing about her. I can't get into her head, but it's a classic case, in my opinion. You sleep with one eye open. There are some people like Ro Khanna, who's a congressman from California, who clearly is a type of progressive capitalist, progressive left capitalist, who I'm very comfortable with by those standards. But with someone like Ocasio-Cortez, she's a little more vaguer. She said some of the right things on certain issues, but I don't fully 100% trust her, if you want my truth. Because I like people that give very straight answers on important policy issues. If you give me a few minutes, I'll read it, because I think it's an important topic to discuss. If you want to respond, but while I find the quote, because I think it's important for you and the listeners to decide, but I found it a very evasive answer, and I just don't like that. So if you just give me the opportunity to find this, because it's in some notes for an upcoming essay paper I'm writing on the communist and Russian, Soviet, Chinese infiltration of elements of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, well, what I would say to that is, yeah, well, when somebody is going to run for president, they always, that you have to appeal to a larger group of voters. You have to moderate your positions. Always in the primaries, you run in the Democratic Party to the left and the Republicans to the right, and then you move towards the center in the general election. She's so far to the left that she's already moving to the center. And I think it's just a game, to be honest, because watching her career, she is not a moderate. Look, she goes on these what it was, she was on stage with Angela Davis, and she's part of the Squad, right? And the Squad is, well, they're just very radical. These are radical leftists. These aren't center left people at all. She tips the hat to Hakeem Jeffries and the leadership of the Democratic Party. But when she came into office, when she was a freshman congressman, she was going around threatening moderate Democrats that they were going to pour money into their campaigns and unseat them if they cooperated with the Republicans on any legislation. That's kind of like extortion. You're running an extortion racket in the neighborhood. This is what she comes out as a freshman congressman doing. It's a nasty business when you're using intimidation, when you're you're just in your 20s and you're the youngest female congressman ever elected, and you're going around threatening your members of your own party that they better be as radical as you are, somewhat, or you're going to unseat them.
Go ahead.
It's a Bolshevik. It smells of Bolshevism, to be honest.
Yeah, so she wrote in a couple of interviews where she's cited, and folks in the audience, if I'm taking it out of context, let me know. But she said, for example, in a firing line interview on PBS, she said, ultimately, we are marching towards progress on this issue. So she responded to a question about democratic socialism, ultimately calling for an end to capitalism during a firing line interview on PBS. She answered, ultimately, we are marching towards progress on this issue. I do think we are going to see an evolution in our economic system of an unprecedented degree, and it's hard to say what direction that takes. That's a very significant answer because it's so vague. It's so open-ended.
I don't think it's that vague, Nevin. I think she's clearly stating that we're moving to flat out socialism, that we are going to dispossess the propertied class. I think it's very clear when I read that language, having been in graduate school side by side with Marxists, I know how to read that. She's a socialist.
What I was going to say is she's hiding something.
And what she's hiding is the fact that what could be more violent than in a country with millions of private business owners, where capitalism is on the basic family business level. Look at all these restaurants. Look at all of the hotels. Look at all of the small businesses and the plumbers and the electricians and the contractors. Look at all these businesses. You are talking about dispossessing millions of people of their property, of their and that you have the right to do this, to take away people's, not only their property, their livelihood, all their plans of their life, everything they've worked for in their lives. You are arrogating. What could be more violent? If you take away my life, my means of living, you are taking away my life. If you destroy my business, you're destroying my life. It's like murder. She is talking a language of, through economics, of violence. Now, she would maintain, by the way, that capitalism is violence against the employees. Standard Marxist, the line is that the workers are the ones done violence by the robbery of capitalist means, capitalist production. I'm sorry, that's not fair. Capitalist system's not perfect. There's things that go wrong, but she's not a reformist. She's gone to a completely different level on this. And I think that's where this radicalism is on the left. And the problem is that if you know how to hear what they're saying, so when you get these Antifa people, benevolent barons, American worker-centered industrialism.
Capitalism, like anything else, is very nuanced. And I'm a critic of capitalism.
Well, look at Henry Ford.
Passionate disagreements, but this is the proof. This is the history in my hand to show there are a lot of benevolent barons, and I talked about this with Mr. Scott, Fabian Liberty, the anarcho-capitalist streamer, and I recommend it. This is one of the books. If you want to make somebody an ANCAP or someone favor the type of capitalism that you or I support and introduce them, read this book. He's a professor of business, and I forget the university in Ohio, Quentin Scrabick Jr. And this is my response to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And when I look at my notes for my essays on the socialist communist penetration of elements of the Democratic Party, I just see the contradiction. I'm saying, ma'am, what are you hiding? And when somebody is hiding and obfuscating and not just saying outright because it's vague language, and you have the personal experience and I have the more scholarly knowledge like you do, I smell, all right, you're hiding something. What is really ticking in your head? So when people say that capitalism full stop is violence, no. I mean, the type of totalitarian socialism, what about the tens of millions of body counts accumulated by that? What do you have to say?
The revolution is violent, and the totalitarian government is violent. It is violence on a day-to-day level, jailing, muzzling, murdering, destroying people's lives. I mean, you read the Gulag Archipelago, but that's just scratching the surface. So many people in the Soviet Union, so many people in communist China, in Cuba, in today's Venezuela, and throughout Africa, where the communists have taken power. You have people who aren't going to the Gulag, but they're living in a misery. They're living muzzled. They have to look over their shoulder all the time. It's unbelievable. Their children are being turned into snitches against them or being brainwashed. I mean, you think about that over and over again through the last 100 years. This has been the pattern. And of course, National Socialism in Germany was much the same thing. And when you look at this realistically, and you see, I mean, they call it Matthias. I just read The Psychology of Totalitarianism by the Belgian psychologist Matthias Desmet. I don't know if you know his work, but I've read parts of the book 2-3 times. It's so good. And he's saying, look, mass formation, there's 30% of the population that is there's something wrong with them. In some respect, they're susceptible to totalitarian formation, to mass formation, to become a mass, who they will follow criminals. And if they get enough power, and the 10% of natural leaders who stand up and will speak truth to power, if they're eliminated, the society is then in a vice grip. And these totalitarians have control of it. And what we see with the Russian exploitation of this divide in America, we see two mass formations, one on the right, one on the left, the Russians feeding both of them, the Russians wanting to see a civil war in this country, and the Russians jumping up and down and applauding really the idea of that Charlie Kirk was their guy, and that Charlie Kirk, that the Ukrainians maybe had a hand in it, or the Ukrainians, it shows you how evil the Ukrainians are because Charlie Kirk was murdered in America. Well, I'm sorry, but the crazy left winger that shot him was inspired by ideas that were cooked up in think tanks in Moscow, and off on our academics. That's what I can see. And so they're feeding the violence, and they're feeding the mass formation from both sides, the irrationality that will sweep away the rational people in this country, that veneer of civilization, that is the people that will stand up and speak. So if, let's say, Charlie Kirk is one of these people who's trying to be rational, he stood up in front of people and he said, look, tell me where I'm wrong. I would have loved to take that up with him and talk to him about Ukraine and Russia. But he was open to debate. He was open to discussion. Tell me where I'm wrong. This is the important thing. You're going to silence these kind of people. You're destroying that 10% who can have discussion, who can lead, who can build organizations, and this is part of mass formation headed towards civil war.
And I'm glad you mentioned the Russians too as well, and I agree with you. And this is, if I'm deriving one of the many lessons that I'm deriving personally from this, is to have people on my show that don't always 100% agree with me on certain issues, because I think it's important. There's a value in having conversations where we debate, but it can be done in a civil and a rational manner. You can be passionate and even opinionated, but without being just dehumanizing your opponents and whatnot. And this is what ultimately comes out of this whole thing, which is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Now, the Russians, they're licking their chops. And notice the rhetoric. And one thing that struck me is the rhetoric. They're clearly playing to the various shades of the right to get them even angrier. You had Dmitry Medvedev. He said in a tweet, in a post from yesterday, political crimes and assassinations have been carried out lately by a variety of left-wing liberal scum who support Banderite Kiev, Fico, who was the pro-Russian dictator in Slovakia, and now Kirk. Who's next? Maybe it's time for the MAGA team to realize that by supporting Ukraine, they're supporting murderers. You have Alexander Dugin wrote a piece, Charlie Kirk's Death and the Coming Civil War, where he presents Charlie Kirk's assassination as a turning point, with MAGA uniting in rage, liberals celebrating, Ukraine rejoicing, and America sliding towards civil war. Let me see if there's anything else. And then I see on the right, they're just blanket attacking people on the left, even people that I've interviewed on this program who I know for a fact, where I even presented my anti-communist ideas and didn't get any nastiness or disrespect. And this is disturbing too, where you have Curtis Yarvin, you have many on the national conservative right, the NatCon crowd types, are calling for an American Caesar. And if you look at Curtis Yarvin's, for example, his posts on X, I mean, he uses sometimes rather vituperative, crude language in his posts, and they're all openly calling for an American Caesar. And the problem with that is that slides the United States further towards further political polarization, civil war, and atrocities. Like, one person attacked a fellow, he wrote a book called Liberal Socialism, Matt McManus. And this Matt McManus wrote, the level of dehumanization, and Matt was correct, and he's a man, I would say, of the more moderate left. The level of dehumanization on the internet today, from people cheering on an assassination to those cynically chomping at the bit for ideological retaliation before you even know the facts of the case, makes me glad I'll be offline most of the day. And one conservative or right-wing responder said, again, you didn't even call out the people you are friends with, like this killing or lying, call him a racist or that he pushed violence. You, Matthew McManus, you are a big part of your insane leftist violent movement. You are not who you say you are. You are a professor with too much influence on these young indoctrinated minds you teach. And I honestly think you are glad Charlie was shot. I really do. And this is the thing. There's like this idea of shoot first and ask questions later, whether it's people on the left, on the right, whether it's showing the book here, capitalists saying all capitalists are evil and let's just kill them all or put them in camps. I feel like people like me who, or even you, and others who are on varying shades of the right or the center or the left, are just, our voices of reason are just drowned out of the discourse. And some of this is spreading in the streets. You have people on individual far leftists in the streets hailing this, and it's, I'm just reminded, I look back, you look at, for example, the guillotine that was constructed outside of Jeff Bezos' house. I'm a fierce critic of Jeff Bezos, but also the implication is when you're have a guillotine outside his home, you probably heard about it on the news that had occurred, was a year or so ago. There's no nice off-ramp. With this level of radicalism and extremism, and my concern is that the seeds are slowly being sown. The pot is slowly being brought to a rolling boil, that we could end up in a major crisis. And the Russians, Dugin, Foundations of Geopolitics, that's what I'm reading right from there. It's from those ideas, and they just love it. And then they will come and swoop in for the kill. Then people, maybe this sounds hyperbolic, Jeff and the rest of the audience, people like Danny Haifong, people like Black Red Guard, could very well become collaborators with this new order, with Russia and China swooping it. And maybe that sounds like, I get sometimes, I was talking to a national conservative, good guy, but, he said, well, Cold War is over. Well, I'm sorry, it's not. We have too much evidence. You and I write volumes of information on the fact that the Cold War has continued. This is a serious problem we need to take into account. And I am done talking. Thank you for indulging me, Jeff, on my rant.
Well, I mean, it's to show kind of the attitude on the left, the lack of sensitivity, because I don't think when JFK was shot or Martin Luther King was shot or any other person on the left who was shot, you saw this kind of display of bad taste and cruelty. You had bloggers write, instead of Turning Point USA, which was his organization, they joked Hollow Point USA.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
One wrote, I don't know. I think getting killed by your favorite thing in the world is sweet, a nice gesture, right? Because Charlie Kirk defended the Second Amendment. He defended gun rights. In Blue Sky, where many liberals have FedEx to evade Elon Musk, one wrote, and now we sit back and watch Republicans ignore the school shooting today while loudly mourning Charlie Kirk. Another said this wouldn't have happened if Charlie Kirk had been armed, right? The celebration of the left on social media mirrors that of liberals in the media and even elected office. We see MSNBC, this is really disgraceful, sparked outrage for this comment, describing Kirk as divisive and polarizing. This is what you say when someone is shot dead. You rip them. And then what was maybe even worse was what happened on CNN. Political analyst Matthew Dodd suggested that the gunshot could have been fired by one of Kirk's supporters.
That's just over the top. That's really big.
I mean, this is because they believe in taking away people's firearms. Like firearms just jump off the table and shoot people. Look, I'm sorry. Guns don't shoot people. People do. And the reason that you're armed is that you are, you take away guns from all the law-abiding citizens. The criminals don't care. They're going to have guns anyway. There's hundreds of thousands of guns in downtown LA, Chicago, Washington, D.C. You're going to disarm the citizens against that, against the armed criminals? We've got such a huge criminal class in this country. They have called, on social media, they have called Kirk an effing Nazi. They have said, they have joked that Charlie Kirk got four-letter word. Why didn't Charlie Kirk just debate the bullet? He would have easily deflected. These are the kind of things that this is the kind of coarse debate. When you have rabble in this country so dominant, such smart alecks, people with no respect, that treat a violent incident like this, you have a problem. Because you have people who are not in the American spirit. I don't know where these creeps came from. I don't know where these psychopaths came from. But these people are evil. And they represent, every one of these you see, there's 1,000 people who are thinking that.
Yeah, I mean, and I wouldn't even call them smart Alex. They're a lot worse with some of the statements that you've read. I mean, Hollow Point USA. I mean, again, let's take that quote that you just read, the first one. Let it sink in. Look, I'm not going to lie. There are things I really vehemently disagreed with Charlie Kirk. There are people that I vehemently disagree with. I would love the opportunity at the same time to have a civil discourse with somebody like that and export my views and plant my seeds if I had that opportunity. This is basically calling for the assassination of political dissent. That's how I see it. When you look, words, I'm sorry, I don't agree with necessarily what we were told as kids, Jeff, sticks and stones can break your bones, but words cannot hurt you. I'm sorry, words are bullets, words are ammunition, and they carry a lot of weight. And there's a lot of meaning between phrases like Hollow Point USA. I think the best way to handle ideas that you disagree with is more speech, more evidence, more people speaking out. And that's my thing, on both the right and the left. I'm not happy with either side. One beautiful thing I did see, and I reposted on my X page, I believe, was where you had a Democratic Party University Club and the Republican Party University Club. Both at some university, I think it is. I forget which one. They issued a joint statement condemning the murder. And maybe I sound Pollyannish. Maybe I'm not militant enough on either side. But that's the kind of thing I want to see in American politics, is that kind of thing.
But you know what we saw instead, Nevin, is Colorado Republican Representative Lauren Boebert calling for a silent prayer for Kirk, and who was then in critical condition. He hadn't been announced as dead yet. And she said, I believe silent prayers get silent results. And she was met with boos from Democrats.
Yeah, some of the Democrats booed her. And that's just disgusting. I'd like to know which ones.
Yeah, I think that people like that should be run out of politics. They should not be allowed in politics. They do not possess the basic civic spirit and civility to be in politics. If we have leaders like that in either party, and of course, you got Republicans who are saying we need to crack down on the left, that's not right either. If people, look, one of the things that I think we're soft on is treason in either party. And treason is adhering to the enemy. And we have a real problem with that and not recognizing who our enemies are. So that being said, you don't call for a crackdown on somebody politically who disagrees with you. That is completely crazy. That's un-American. And when a politician tries to blame words for an action, they need to look at their actions and their record. And this is what Democratic Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told reporters. And why this is a defensive reaction, because the words that these radical leftists have been saying are responsible in some sense for inciting this guy. We have to be careful about our speech inciting people to do violence. Violence is not acceptable, and we can't go down this spiral road of violence or we'll end up in the Spanish Civil War. And you
That's
look
a
at
fear of mine.
yeah, yeah.
That's a fear of mine, to be honest with you, Jeff. I'm nervous. And to tell you the truth, I mean, my politics, at least, even, I don't know how you feel on it. Look, compared to the Phalangists, the FET, which was Franco's forces, which were ideologically fascist, versus the increasingly communist dominated Republicans, it's like I am far more libertarian politically and economically compared to those two groups. And in the Spanish Civil War, I probably would, I don't know, I probably would be some centrist because, or something, some minority, because I don't agree with both sides. And my concern is you have this militance, like some of the quotes I read from people who are closed-minded or hateful on the right, as well as also the numerous quotes from the hardcore leftists, outright communists that you and I are sharing with our listeners. I got to tell you, I'm going to be honest, I feel discouraged, but I feel encouraged that I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing on my program with my guests and trying to start up conversations with people. Maybe, you know, I mean, there are things that are giving me hope. I found this joint statement. It's from the College Dems of Ohio. And I reposted it on my X page. And it talked about the Ohio College Republican Federation and the College Democrats of Ohio stand together to reject political violence in all its forms unequivocally. What happened at Utah Valley University yesterday is unacceptable. Violence undermines the very foundations of our republic and must be rejected by all Americans. Our thoughts and prayers are with Charlie Kirk's family and loved ones. He had 2 kids, by the way, 2 very young kids. And I say this, it's hurt, you know, because it hits home because I'm a dad. The UVU community impacted by this atrocity, and with all Americans who witnessed this happen. Together, we must foster a culture where disagreement never escalates to harm. May our shared commitment to democracy guides us towards a safer and more united America. And I say to you in the audience, you want to see what the Russians are most afraid of? It's what I just read. This is what's going to defeat Russia, China, the left extremists that you and I are writing about, the right-wingers who want this sort of almost fascist, populist type of reaction of people being herded in stadiums. So they're going to usher in their own collectivist tyranny, possibly. You know, because again, if you have unchecked, just like I criticize unchecked, concentrated, privatized power, I am deathly afraid of unaccountable government power where there's no rules, no checks and balances, and it's all based on vibes and passions. This is what's going to defeat, not my cell phone, obviously, but what I just read to you and your audience and my audience, that kind of unity. And I'll get off my soapbox for now.
Yeah, well, yes, unity. America needs to be unified, and the problem is it's not unified. We have to be honest about it. There is such a divide between people on the left who think the society is unjust and needs to be wiped away and replaced with something new. You know, Obama saying, you know, we need change, celebrating the replacement of everything, having an open border, even to the point of replacing the population. Look, America's too white. We need to bring in more brown people from other cultures. We need to bring in more Muslims. Look at Europe. Look what's happening in Britain, by the way. On Saturday, they're going to have a protest march. The British people are just about fed up. They're being arrested for speaking out against piling more Muslims into the country. Look, Great Britain doesn't have a history of being a Muslim country. It's not a Muslim country, and they're making it into one by opening the border. You know, if I wanted to live in a Muslim country, I would move to one if I was British, right? Why do I want to just sit here and allow my politicians to flood Muslims into the country until the number one name of baby boys being born is Muhammad in Great Britain? Same thing in France. Same thing in other countries in Europe. And it's like, You are literally destroying your own nation. And if people object, you're going to put them in jail because they're objecting to this? Who wouldn't object? The people in Mecca would object if you started putting up Catholic churches and bringing in Europeans and colonizing them. Their own government is doing this to them. Look, I'm not a revolutionist, and this is the land of Burke, the UK. Burke was an Irishman, but okay. But he was part of, he's part of the British system. He was in Parliament. It's unthinkable. But look, what do you do? And you look, who do they have leaders? The problem is, you look at the leaders and their education in our leftist institutions, and there's a madness there in these people. They believe in policies that will essentially suicide the countries that they're in charge of, whether it's Germany and the Greens and the Social Democrats, or England and the Labour Party, or France. Maybe France is turning the corner. I don't know. And Canada, which is, I'm told by conservatives in Canada, the country's being taken over by the Chinese. You look what's happened in Mexico and in the United States. We had to elect Trump, a guy who's very imperfect, and I voted for him, and I'm not a big fan of Trump, but that or someone who thinks we shouldn't have a border, the Democratic
we don't have
candidate.
good choices. I mean, I told you on the program I voted third party because I have my agreements and disagreements with both candidates.
But where's the leadership? You see, the thing about mass formation, when I go to Desmet's book on totalitarianism, the thing that's scary is mass formation is that 30% of the people that have no business leading because they can't think and they couldn't follow someone who could, and they basically want to suppress anybody who asks questions. Look at what happened during the pandemic. You've got this kind of thing coming about in the country where where are the natural organic leaders? We saw some of the people that stood up during the pandemic, but you look around and in the regular political movements, it's somehow no people asking questions are allowed. Nobody with an independent mind is allowed. You have to belong to the groupthink, either right or left, to be a leader in their group. And these people, they aren't real leaders. They're actors who can say the words that the mob wants to hear. I hate to say that, but that's the impression I'm getting. And President Trump is a guy who says saying some things that I like, some things I don't like, but I don't have the sense that he can think, that he really understands anything or much of anything. I mean, is that a fair criticism? And of course, Harris understands everything in an inverted way, so she's wrong on everything, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, look, Trump, we've discussed many times. I was a Trump supporter in 2015, 2016. His administration has, at least if we want to talk about foreign policy, he has people that I felt at least before they entered the Trump administration are very solid, like Marco Rubio, like the director of the CIA, General Kellogg, Mike Waltz, who I believe is the director of the CIA, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, Peter Navarro, on trade issues, dealing with China. Sometimes they'll issue statements on social media that are good points, like embargo busting by India when it comes to the oil trade and other forms of trade with Putin's Russia. But on the other hand, the Trump administration, and it's not unique to the Trump administration, it's unique to every administration, Democratic and Republican. He has a lot of, frankly, deeply troubling people. Tulsi Gabbard, I respect her military service, but she's got a lot of troubling positions. You have Darren J. Beatty, who I, just searched my Twitter page, searched the internet. He is pro-Chinese Communist Party. He is against civic nationalism in the type that's very unitary across the genders, classes, races, etc. He's a bit of a eugenicist. He's very pro-Putin. He's married to a woman who is the niece of a top Russian oligarch politically tied to Putin, who helped apparently bring Putin to power in 1999, which was kind of controlled to begin with because Yeltsin supported the transition in the late 1990s to Putin. So, and there are probably other people that I'm missing too in the administration that I'm not covering. So I am deeply concerned. You know, he is the ear of a number of big tech oligarchs that are connected at times with Russia or China, that have authoritarian tendencies, certainly, who back Curtis Yarvin, who is another dangerous character, who is, by the way, as I said, he's lapping it up on social media. He is lapping it up, you know, calling for this essentially, as you would call it, a new American Caesar. And it's just vindicating people like him and many others. In this.
And this is why the Russians are getting so excited. I have a few quotes from the right I want you to react to just briefly. Katie Miller, the wife of White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, posted on X, quote, "It's a real treat to see all these liberals condemn political violence now. You called us Hitler. You called us Nazis. You called us racists. You have blood on your hands." Is that a fair statement from Katie?
Yes and no. There are many on the left that viewed people like you or me as fascists. I actually was, by some streamers, not intentionally, when I use the term radical civic nationalist, they thought I was a fascist. And I know they weren't being insulting, but I think there's this view, not to get into the weeds, that any kind of all forms of nationalism are considered automatically fascism, and that's not unfair. There are different flavors.
That's a view you commonly met with in Europe.
Yeah, and it's just not fair, to be honest with you. But yeah, there's grains of truth to that. You know, Charlie Kirk was viewed as a Nazi. However,
I mean, think about how crazy that is. Charlie Kirk is viewed as a Nazi. I mean, isn't that crazy? I mean, it is.
Yeah, it is crazy.
In what sense is there any trace of anti-Semitism in Charlie Kirk?
Look, he's a Zionist. I mean, by and large, although there are some.
Just think about that. The guy's a Zionist, and they're calling him a Nazi. Is that crazy?
Well, the problem is look, this is the common confusion, and I'll get back to Miller's quote, because part of it is fair and part of it is deeply disturbing to me. And she's not unique. There are ones that are far worse than hers that I have found. There is this confusion between plutocracy and fascism and National Socialism. They are not the same freaking thing.
No, they're not.
National Socialism and fascism, okay, call for this subordination of labor, of business, of all sectors of the economy and civil society to the almighty state.
Yeah, and by the way,
is when business runs the state. I don't understand why it's so hard for people to can't figure that out, but I don't think they want to figure it out, because then maybe they might find out that some of their politics that they have amongst elements of the left might have something a little bit in common with fascism and National Socialism. What do you think of that? The embarrassment factor.
Well, see,
sorry to yell.
Fascism and National Socialism agree with communism in hating plutocracy.
Yeah,
and whatever you want to say against plutocracy, it's not fascist, it's not National Socialist, and it's not communist. And that's something positive you could say about plutocracy.
Right, and that's the thing. What they mean by plutocracy is not my criticism of plutocracy. They want to get rid of capital.
They want to exterminate it.
Yeah.
And hang the plutocrats.
Right, and the Nazis and their collaborators, and I'm like a total historical nerd about this. I have like scoured even non-English language sources on this. I mean, Goebbels called for the mass execution of industrialists once the Axis won the war. Hitler talked about nationalizing more sectors of the German economy had Germany won the war.
Well, Hitler, socialism and National Socialism, but let's move from this from a second, Evan, and keep on with these comments.
I'm sorry, it's a topic.
Elon Musk said the left is the party of murder. Now, Elon Musk could be described as a plutocrat. Some people might describe him thus. The left is the party of murder. What do you think about that statement from Elon Musk?
I think it's hypocritical. Now, but let me get back to Miller because I know he had a digression. But again, when you lump everybody in, like when you lump every right winger, like Charlie Kirk as a Nazi, that's dumb. That's dishonest. It's BS. When you lump everybody in the left and saying that they're the party of murder or murderers or all closeted or open totalitarians, that creates a dehumanization. And that is deeply problematic to me because, again, what I read, you had the Ohio Democrats, or in one of the universities in Ohio, the Democrats and Republicans coming together. That's the message that should be done. Now, with Musk,
Well, hold on. Let me comment on your comment on Katie Miller because you just said something. Look, Katie didn't say anything about the left. Her quote was, "It's a real treat to see all these liberals condemn political violence now. You called us Hitler. You called us Nazis. You called us racist. You have blood on your hands." No, she didn't say which liberals did this, but she's pointing to liberals because liberals have done this. We've seen it.
Not every liberal has done that either.
But she says these liberals, so she's talking about those people who have called us Hitler, have called us Nazis, meaning the MAGA people. And so I think she's being specific to only those who have called that out. And I think that, to be fair, she's not really painting with a broad brush, although people might take it that way. Anyway, that would be my defense of Katie Miller's statement.
That could be. And I think she's also, as I said, partially right too as well. We have to be honest with that. Yeah. With Musk, I mean, look, I have no problem with Musk. I have no problem that he's almost a trillionaire. That's not a problem in my book.
Is he almost a trillionaire?
Yeah, from what I understand, yeah. But I don't see that as an issue. I look at how you make your money, how you treat your workers, how you deal with national security issues because you're a politically powerful business person by virtue of the money. The money is not the issue or how much you have in itself. Let me made that clear 1,000 times with you and many other guests and in my writings. The issue with Musk is he deals with the CCP. He's pro-Putin. I don't particularly trust him. I really take what he says with a grain of salt. What does he mean, the left? Is he referring to like Ro Khanna left, which is not crazy? Or is he referring to the Danny Haifong left, who happens to love China, which Musk also happens to love? Musk's statement is worse, I guess, or even vaguer than Katie Miller's. But I really don't particularly like Musk, to be honest with you, for a variety of reasons.
His statement is a generalization. He's referring to the left itself. So it's a big thing, and he's making a really big generalization. Now, Musk's shared comment on X, there was put alongside a post by venture capitalist and political activist Sean McGuire, who said, this is what McGuire said: "The left lectured us for the last decade about the dangers of violence from the right. The danger was actually on the left," unquote. So what do you say about McGuire's statement?
Well, I think there is some danger on the left. There's no doubt about that.
Do you believe the January 6th narrative that there was an attempt to overthrow the government on January 6th, or was it just in a giant crowd of 1 million people, you had a tiny group of a few dozen who broke the law and broke some windows? I mean, how do you view it?
I haven't really done a deep dive in that, so I reserve comment. The only thing that I have studied a little bit about January 6th is that I know the fellow who broke into Nancy Pelosi's office and stole her laptop was later found to have attempted to transfer it to Russian intelligence. And I know the Chinese and the Russians were having a field day in their media and portraying it as a failure of American liberalism and democracy. I would not be surprised if there were agents of Russia and China seated in both the militants as well as the tamer protesters who stayed outside the Capitol building and didn't storm the Capitol. So, but it's not something I've studied. I've not studied the hearings, the documents, and whatnot. So I really want to reserve full comment. But there's like a couple of quotes here that I wanted to read further from the right, Matt Fornoy, who is a commentator, said Charlie Kirk being assassinated is the American Reichstag fire. It's time for a complete crackdown on the left. Every Democratic politician must be arrested and the party banned under RICO.
Well, who is he?
He's a commenter. Matt Fornoy, I've heard his name before.
I haven't.
Yeah.
Now the thing is that look,
let me finish reading this.
Okay,
Every
go ahead.
libtard commentator must be shut down. Stochastic terrorism, they caused this. And there are a lot of quotes like that flying around out there. And
this is the stuff of Civil War. This is the overreaction of Civil War. And you got Laura Loomer, who basically said the left are terrorists. And she said the left is a national security threat. We must shut these lunatic leftists down once and for all. You see, the thing is years ago, when the communists were infiltrating the Democratic Party, I believe the Democratic Party is heavily influenced by communists. But what is the correct answer? It's not to willy-nilly paint with a broad brush and start arresting Democratic politicians and shutting down the Democratic Party. I mean, that's not the solution. That is, I just don't understand this extremism. There is a gentle way of debating and showing that there's a problem in the Democratic Party and one in the Republican Party now with MAGA. I think you'll agree with me that we have to have a discussion about what is patriotism, who was the domestic enemy, who wants to overthrow the Constitution, who wants to take freedom away. And there's an individual right there you quoted who wants to take people's freedom away, who wants to get rid of voting, basically just tear down. I mean, he's saying tear down the Constitution. That's what
James Woods. James Woods, the actor. And I remember James Woods when he was in Oliver Stone movies, like the movie Salvador, if you remember, where he played a photojournalist. And that movie was broadly sympathetic to the FMLN. For those who don't know the Salvadoran history of El Salvador, they were the Cuban and communist supported terrorists that fought against various Salvadoran governments. And James Woods has moved towards the right for whatever reason, I'm not sure. In many years ago, he said, dear leftists, we can have a conversation or a civil war. One more shot from your side and you will not get this choice again. Now, that's problematic. Now, to answer your point on the Communist Party.
Well, but by the way, just to be fair to
James Democrats.
Just to be fair to James Woods, he's not saying that he's advocating that. He's saying that that's what is going to result. There's a difference.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, he doesn't say, he's not advocating it. He's saying if you do that one more time, that's what you're going to do, because he's telling them they're stirring up a hornet's nest. And there's some justice to saying that. Look, if you have enough violence from the left, and this goes to the Spanish Civil War. Spanish Civil War started with one act of violence triggered it. One murder. A Spanish senator, leftist politicians showed up in police uniform at his door and asked him to come in for questioning. They weren't policemen. They had false identity. They took him into custody. He was found dead in a police van the next morning. The right in Spain, the conservatives in Spain, went nuts and formed into armed columns immediately, and they had been completely docile. They had been persecuted. They'd had the 1936 February election stolen from them, and this one event, unexpectedly, the socialist leaders in the Republic of Spain thought, the right, they're weak, they can't do anything, they won't do anything, and they didn't seem capable of resisting at all. They were just bullied for years by the Republic, and then all of a sudden they weren't. And so I think James Wood's comment is to the point that if you do create a culture of violence against the right on the left, and this is okay to burn businesses. I mean, just think what we've been through these last several years. We had billions of dollars of private property and businesses burned out by the uprising of the summer of 2020. We had the election, we were accused of trying to overthrow the Republic because we voted for Trump. And I'm not a big Trump fan, but I felt like that was an accusation against me, when it was really, I think the event of January 6th was misrepresented. And there may have been agent provocateurs of the FBI there. There is so much dirty business coming from the left and from the, because look, I'm prejudiced. I was in academia. I lost my career because I disagreed with Marxism. I'm persona non grata in the teaching profession. What I studied for and to be, I couldn't be. I was persecuted. I'm in internal exile.
Can I tell you a story?
It's soft internal exile, but it's the same thing. And when you destroy someone's career, when you destroy them in their profession, it's murder, because you're taking away the life that they worked for and you're making it impossible. So I had to do something else with my life, and I couldn't be what I trained and wanted to be. I was barred from my profession by Marxists in America.
Do you know what happened to I told you about this. I'm not going to mention names where he worked, but he used to be a colleague, and he moved to another state, and he worked in the libraries like me. And he moved to another state, got a job in the library position there, and he was railroaded out of his job by what I termed woke Stalinists. He is a 40-plus year careerist in the library system. I supervised him when he worked in my library system. He was railroaded, not out of my library system, out of another library system outside of Florida, because of a colleague who came from the upper bourgeoisie, by the way, here in the United States, the upper middle class that benefit. But he was a woke.
That's where most communists come from, by the way.
Yeah, of course, that's where I was purposely dropping that. And he was fired by this guy, woke Stalinist, who conducted, I'm probably exaggerating, but I don't think so, essentially struggle sessions at work, and highly politicized the workplace, and it was allowed. And my friend got pushed out of his job. And of course, in the system that he worked, there was no unions to protect him. Basically, what the bosses said goes, no checks and balances. And now he is working at Lowe's in a low-level job with unpredictable scheduling and crappy pay, and he has to do that. And this is something, look, he was a librarian. He did historical reenacting. He was as much of a historical nerd, and I don't say that as a pejorative, as me or you for that matter, and other people that I've dealt with. And they destroyed his life. And he tried to reach out to some conservative local politicians, and they wouldn't do shit. So this is how I see the system, and how I see he is a microcosm.
And you see, if you're a person persecuted, the idea that there was persecution of minorities in this country, persecution of Indians, certainly a terrible treatment of Indians, terrible treatment of blacks with slavery. But now today, who's the ones that are getting terrible treatment? And it's not terrible in the sense the way blacks and Indians were treated. I don't mean to compare what happens to people who lose their jobs to that, but still, it is a tragedy in your life when your life is kind of a ruination of your life, but you still have a relatively comfortable life. But it's extremely dangerous, and it's evil.
And if they empower this gentleman,
and everybody else who's comfortable tolerates it. If you tell people, nobody's going to stand up for you, I'm sorry. And it's the same thing with the family courts and the way men are treated in a lot of divorces and the way no-fault divorces worked out. I just need to pipe up and say that, because that is contrary to the Constitution. Having people lose their property and their rights by something that's not a trial of their peers in a jury court is wrong. That's unconstitutional. The family courts are unconstitutional. Someday they will be struck down, but if the Constitution survives. But I want, going back to James Woods, I just want to give a more nuanced quote from him, because he explains himself. And this one, he says, he basically says that the left murdered Kirk. That's a generalization similar to what Elon Musk said. And he said, quote, "The left says they want national conversations. Charlie Kirk actually did just that. in the lion's den, no less, at left-leaning venues, hoping facts and common sense would prevail, and they murdered him for it, unquote. It's not gun violence, it's Democrat violence. And I would side with, I didn't quite agree with what you said about Katie Miller, but I agree with that, with what you said applied to James Woods. I agree and I disagree. There's a truth in what Woods is saying, but there is a slight exaggeration here, because he's painting with a broad brush. He's using the term left and Democrat, and I don't think it really should include everyone on the left and all Democrats. But there is and I would say the same thing for people who lump all MAGA people together. There are MAGA people who are conspiracy theorists, who are anti-Semites, who have objectionable views. In fact, you were mentioning to me before the podcast this outrageous State Department official.
Darren J. Bading. Yeah, and there's a bunch of other things I wanted to answer.
No, we don't want to be smeared with this guy. If you voted for Trump or you happen to identify as MAGA, you certainly shouldn't identify with this guy. Describe what this guy is about.
Darren J. Beatty is a history professor, and he was active in NatCon, National Conservative Circles. He received a position, was appointed Assistant Secretary of State for Public Diplomacy, so he got rid of one of the things I personally agreed with the previous administration, the development of an agency that countered Russian and Chinese disinformation. He got rid of that. And I think this Beatty was, I should say Secretary of State Rubio was probably pressured to appoint this guy, because this guy is totally at odds with Rubio's worldview. And I'm going to read a bunch of quotes. And then afterwards, I want to read a quote by a communist who is attacking Bernie Sanders for making a decent statement on the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And then I wanted to also buttress your point. Look, the communists, Russians, Chinese are all infiltrating all the parties, and they are also infiltrating the Democratic Party. It's not to bash the Democrats, so I'm going to give some historical information that
they want to exacerbate this divide in America. They want to see a civil war here to enable their conquest of the world.
Correct. Yeah, so Beatty tweeted either Russia or China. And Beatty said either Russia or China needs to set up a giant server farm for the purpose of hosting Americans who want to be able to criticize their corrupt government. Would be a huge move, game changer. Think outside the box. He also said things that were very pro-CC, pro-Chinese Communist Party, pro-Putin, he's married to a Russian lady who is the niece of a prominent Russian oligarch connected to Putin, who apparently also helped Putin into office in 1999. He basically justified China's repression of the Uyghurs, said that they should just lose their Uyghurness and become upstanding Chinese citizens. He said, for example, unpopular claim, NATO is a greater threat to American liberty than the Chinese Communist Party. And he says, sounds crazy, I know, but I'd be willing to debate anyone serious on this topic publicly.
So he'd be willing to debate me on that, would he?
That would be great. So I think somebody like that should be fired. If I was Gusak administration, I would fire him the first day.
He should be fired and investigated.
Yeah, fired and investigated. And look, there are people, historically on the left, like Ronald Dellums, who had no business, in my opinion, being in the Congress or the House Armed Services Committee, to top it off. I mean, yes, I know he was elected. I get it. But still, with his positions and his literal subversive activities, which I'm not going to go over now, So Beatty is a problem. And this is
Beatty, by attacking NATO as a State Department official, he's adhering to the enemy and he's actually helping the enemy.
he is no business being there. But, to answer your point on the Democrats, I mean, this is a very long-standing thing. Now, the Democrats, through my study, and I'm going to be issuing a 2-part paper.
And the Democrats have this problem in spades.
Yeah. I mean, Earl Browder, and this was in the original source, Earl Browder, who used to be the Communist Party USA leader.
Bill Browder's grandfather.
Wrote in 1937 that one of the CPUSA's objectives was to, quote, encourage them to systematic and organized activity within the Democratic Party with the utmost possible independent organization, making a common front with all left forces to defeat the reactionaries and to strengthen the progressive forces in that party.
That was 80 years ago.
That's 1937. Peter
more than 80 years ago.
Goodsite, who was the KGB station chief in New York, recalled that the Soviets intended to, quote, create a group of our people in the legislative bodies, define their political positions, and insert them there to actively influence events. Now, those two items came from, Building the Party and the Struggle for Proletarian Unity in the People's Front, in a publication, old publication called The Communist, volume 16, number 8, 1937, pages 737 to 738. And the other one was by Darren G. Lilliker, Against the Cold War, published by I.B. Torres, 2004, page 6. And that was on the Soviet collaboration with elements of the British Labour Party. It's a very good book, by the way. I recommend it highly. So my point is I'm not trying to smear every Trump supporter, every conservative, or every Democrat as a unpatriotic leftist. But this clearly the evidence shows that there are these infiltration operations. I'm not making this stuff up. This is straight from history, bro.
I think we've got a rabble problem where you've got mass formation going on both sides, on the left and right. I just want to go through a bunch of right-wing quotes just to get past them, because I can't resist quoting Alex Jones, who is perhaps the most egregious of anyone on the so-called right. I think he's a good candidate for being investigated as a Russian agent. So this is what Jones said. This is incredible. Jones said, "This is war, this is war, this is war. The left's coming with their violence. They're coming with more attacks. And we can imagine the hell it'll be if we let them win and we submit to them. So we're not scared of their attacks." So then on a video posted on X, he said, "I guess the answer is we all have to go out. We all have to peacefully hit the streets. We all have to speak out at city councils and colleges." See, he's moderating it to peaceful. Everybody's got to be Charlie Kirk now. So, but he starts out, this is war, this is war, this is war. This is, and now, do you know who Chair Rhetoric is?
Who?
Chair Rhetoric? I don't know.
No, the name doesn't ring a bell.
Well, anyway, she's Libs of TikTok. She posted this.
Oh, I know Libs of TikTok. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is war. Ian Miles Chong,
Yes.
conservative commentator from Malaysia, posted,
Yep.
Charlie Kirk wasn't the first victim of this war. He was the second. The first victim was Erna Zarutska. That's the Ukrainian woman killed
Yes.
on the subway here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this is war. Then Ian Miles added, far-right influencer Andrew Tate. This guy's a real.
Oh yeah, he called for civil war.
He called it. He said civil war. Exactly. Kristen Hawkins, founder of the anti-abortion group Students for Life America, posted, "This is a new civil war." And then Brian Eastwood, conservative influencer, posted, "I'm ready for civil war. You want to fight, and you're going to get it." And then Gunther Eagleman posted, "They've declared war." Fox News, Jesse Waters, and this is a guy I just don't like. I've never liked him. I think he's as phony as a $3 bill.
I
They
don't like
actually
them
have
either.
$2 bills. But this is what he said. He said, whether we want to accept it or not, they're at war with us. And what are we going to do about it? How much political violence are we going to tolerate? And then you have Georgia Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene. There's another real winner.
Mm-hmm.
There's a crazy lady. Quote, the left will not stop until they are forced to. The right must gain power, keep power, and wield power righteously. It almost sounds Hitlerian, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Patrick Casey, host of conservative podcast Restoring Order. It's time to bring the hammer down on the left. Goodness knows what that means. Use your imagination. You've got and I don't know this guy, an X account called Oilfield Rando, who has 220,000 followers, wrote, I don't want the National Guard sent to Democratic cities anymore. I want the Air Force sent, implying, let's bomb the cities. Then you have Matt Forney, and you already quoted that about the Reichstag fire comment that Forty did. But just to reiterate, the left must ban the Democratic Party, shut down CNN and MSNBC, military tribunals. If you are to the left of Lindsey Graham, you belong in prison. You caused this. I mean, this is a visceral, very visceral and very irrational, not a
Many of these people are well-known people too. Eon Miles Chung, I remember he's a big Elon supporter and supported the H-1B visas back when that split MAGA earlier this year. I mean, yeah, many of these people are deeply problematic. I'm going to read you two quotes for you in the audience. There's one who goes under the name James Kirkpatrick, who obviously the actual James Kirkpatrick is not alive. And his handle on X is VDare James K. VDare being the racialist, white racialist publication. He said that Eric Prince, who's the military contractor, as many people know, I'm sure, because Eric Prince tweeted out saying that this person should be hunted down and essentially executed if found. And I'm not saying that person shouldn't get the death penalty. They should get the death penalty if fairly convicted in a fair trial. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to get TOS for that, but the murderer or assassin of Charlie Kirk should get the death penalty if proven guilty. So that part I agree with. So James Kirkpatrick says, Eric Prince should just be Lord Protector, meaning the next Oliver Cromwell, for about 6 months, and then most of our problems are gone. That's problematic vibes. Now, you get Iscolot, whose Twitter handle is @Iscolot, who is a communist when you look at his account. He said in response to Bernie Sanders, when Bernie Sanders says political violence has no place in this country, we must condemn this horrifying attack. My thoughts are with Charlie Kirk and his family, and the screenshot gets cut off there, but he goes on with his thoughts and prayers to Kirk's family. And so Iscola referring to Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders is a lot of the communist parties disavow him or don't like him. He's a confusing character, but he's better than Ocasio-Cortez since 1990. I've studied his career very closely. So this communist Iscolat says to Bernie Sanders, this opportunist scoundrel will weep over a dead fascist instead of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians killed in genocide. Violence has no place in USA. Your system is built on sadistic, wanton violence. And if you keep exporting misery and death, it will come back to you. So that's someone on the left. So am I saying millions of people believe this? No, but you're correct in saying you're having this mass formation. And if you get superior organizers who can get these people organized in real life, you have an economic collapse, we're dragged into a war, and people are already very demoralized and alienated from our government and our economic system. These people that I'm reading, either the Yarvanites and the oligarch-funded authoritarian types on the right, or the Stalinist, Maoist, wacko, totalitarian genocidists on elements of the left, they're going to stir these people up, and they're very good organizers.
And they are. You see, people are. These quotes show how people have been stirred up. I mean, William Wolf, who was the first-term Trump administration official and an executive director of the Center for Baptist Leadership, he posted the following: "The left must be destroyed." Then he added in another post, "The Democrats and the left must be crushed. The goal for Republicans in the next 10 years should be to win elections. No, I'm sorry, not to win elections, but to destroy the Democratic Party entirely and salt the earth underneath, a Carthaginian peace." This is how people are being riled up, and this rhetoric riles up other people. You know, R.N. McIntyre of The Blaze, I think what he said was rhetorically kind of had some rhetorical flourish. He said they thought they shot the voice of reason in the throat.
Yes.
You know, so now it's time to become unreasonable. So this is how people are reacting across the right of center media, and it's not a calming reaction in general. I have to say, it's not a calming reaction,
and that's
it's not the calming reaction that we would have heard in the 60s.
Yes. My mother, who's a baby boomer, said the same thing too, as well, incidentally, when I discussed it with her. Now, there's also a disturbing element of the right, and I screenshotted this tweet. And look, I really cannot stand James Lindsay personally, and there are positions I disagree with him, but I think he's onto something when he condemns a sort of toxic populism of a neo-fascist variety on elements of the right. He terms it the woke right. I find that very annoying. It lacks really any accurate historical description.
Well, I would say one thing. It's a little bit. Remember the Nazi slogan. The early on in the Nazi movement, this slogan was "Deutschland, Germany awaken."
Yes. Yeah.
So there was a woke theme in the early Nazi movement.
Yeah, but I think Lindsay is still onto something when he says this, and there is a disturbing there's a disturbing aspect of the post-liberal right that needs to be called an attention. This is a post on X dated September.
You call it post-liberal right. I just got to stop you there. What does that mean? Could you explain that?
People like Patrick Deneen, for example, and others that believe that liberalism has failed entirely and needs to be replaced. I think there are some authoritarian vibes at times to it.
Well, like Dark Enlightenment and Curtis Yarvin and Nick Land.
And there are different factions of this too. So Mark Mitchell of the Rasmussen Report posted on September 9th of this year. "I did a major Zoomer," which is the younger generation, "deep dive today, and I'm flummoxed. They are really socialist, but also pretty nationalist." So what you see, I think you're going to have this disillusionment with economic and political liberalism. And look, my writings are very critical of it, but I don't toss it overboard. I'm more of a reformist. To a lot of Reagan conservatives, my views are radical, but they're really not. They're old ideas of the mid to the beginning of the late 20th century. But when I see this, a respected pollster on the right of the Rasmussen Report, revealing this information, which is resulting of alienation, anger, possibly foreign subversion. This is like a petri dish. And you get a group of leaders that are smart, that know how to read the room, that can say, look, we're not National Socialists. We just want to bring back certain American traditions and combine it in this syncretic thing, but hide an authoritarian edge. A sort of Lyndon LaRoucheism without the conspiracy theories, if you will. If you get somebody that can do that, they're going to bring these people on board on a form of an Americanized National Socialism that might be devoid of the perhaps the overt anti-Semitism and racialism against people of color and whatnot, and fuse it with something that you and I would recognize as socialism. The Nazis in the United States have talked about, a few of them have talked about hiding their intentions. There was an article I remember reading in Statecraft, which was affiliated with C.B. Baker, who used to be associated with the National Youth Alliance of Willis Carto, and that dissolved into the National Alliance of Dr. William Pierce. And it talked about, look,
these are Nazis, by the way.
Yeah.
Should make everybody know that.
But what they talked about was, well, okay, the American people, they don't like socialism. They don't like the sound of that word. In Germany, you had these reactionary rightists, and they didn't like socialism either, and blah, 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 because the Nazis didn't like reactionary right-wingers. It goes back to our anti-plutocratic ideology that they espouse. So they said is that we can't talk about being National Socialists. You can think like being a National Socialist, but cease calling ourselves National Socialists. David Duke, when being interviewed by Evelyn Rich, and Dr. Edward Fields was in the room too as well, and they had this conversation. She was working on a PhD thesis. And while you respond, I'm going to look up those exact quotes because it's very interesting. David Duke talked about, look, we can't talk about being National Socialists. We have to be National Socialism. We have to be more coy about it and whatnot. So,
it's the same thing going on the left with these DSAers and many other people. We can't
Correct.
talk about being Stalinists or communists. We have to be more coy about it. This is what concerns me about some of these people in the squad. What are they really? And how coy are they being? Right?
Well, a portion of them, like, AOC, for example, she condemns China on certain things. For example, companies supplying the CCP with technology.
What is she being coy, Nevin?
To crush the CCP, anti-CCP protests. And that's excellent. But here the plot thickens. While in Congress, she voted against the permanent committee to investigate the Chinese Communist Party threat. So
why would you vote against that?
Exactly, that's my question. I'm trying to make a point with the contradiction here. So a guy like me, who is not, a super hardcore rightist, probably by your definition, I look at this objectively and I say, well, what's really going on here? When you take a look at also the vote on socialism, and granted the Republicans brought it up, as a vote, you had a number of Democrats. You had corporate Democrats, but you also had progressive Democrats like Ro Khanna from California, who voted for the condemnation of socialism. But the folks in the squad didn't. Now, of course, what I would have done is voted for the condemnation of socialism. And then I would have made a floor speech and made a press conference on explaining my vote, essentially why, and going against both the right and left on that issue. That's a whole different discussion. But so when you look at these votes and positions and quotes, these are things that make you go, what is really going on here? So there is this coyness. And why would you associate with a group, the DSA, that calls for political assassinations? Is fine. If Leon Trotsky himself was a totalitarian Bolshevik. When you take a look at DSA, when they call for the spiking, meaning the censorship in an article by one of its authors that was critical of the CCP in China, they said, no, we're not carrying those types of articles. When you have an organization that creates literal communist caucuses, that's what it's called, are you really for a so-called democratic socialism? I mean, DSA, when we look at the history, DSA was originally called DSOC. That developed from a split where the actual socialists split away from the social democrats. The split of the Norman Thomas, Carl Gershman wing of the Socialist Party of America, of Norman Thomas, That became the Social Democrats USA, which they were very anti-communist. And then the other wing was led by Michael Harrington. That formed into the DSOC, the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, which during the 1980s became Democratic Socialists of America. You know, Harrington, although not a Stalinist, and I'm just going extemporaneously from what I remembered, even though he condemned Stalin, he still supported in 1981 starting the Sandinista dictatorship in Nicaragua, like a lot of leftists at that time. He also called the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union in December of 1979 defensive aggression. So when you really...
That's a rich one.
Yeah, well, it's true.
Murdered a million Afghans, by the way, and made that region into a permanent mess. And Nevin, we're deep into the second hour, so I think
oh Jesus,
we need to start to wind down here. So we've kind of covered it. Let's just say something about where we think things are headed and whether this is gonna get worse. What do you think?
I hope to God it's not going to get worse. I just think we need to do our part. And I think we need to network as people of good faith, whether in the center, the right, the left, and call out the extremists, call out the extremism, you know, because I'm very, very concerned on the way things are headed. But as I said, the quote that I read from the Ohio Democrats, where the Republican at a university, Republican and Democratic clubs got together, that gives me some hope. So I guess I want to cling on to that and not be too much of a pessimist, but I just don't know. I'm very frightened and I'm very saddened by the whole affair.
I'm going to be more pessimistic. I don't know how much. I don't know if this is going to be cause a civil war. I think it could lead to that. I think things will get worse before they get better because, look, I've lived a long time, so I've seen eras that had wiser pundits, wiser voices in the media, both on the left and the right, than we have today, wiser political leaders in both the Democratic and Republican Party, wiser movement leaders, except in the extreme groups that were all very marginalized. You could never get some people as far on the left or the right elected to Congress. It was much more difficult anyway in 40 years ago. And so I think that I see a disintegration in the country, in the political culture over time. And part of it is a lack of education, a lack of understanding, atomization. I think we have mass formation. I think we saw it in the pandemic. I think we're seeing it with MAGA. We've seen it with the left. I think we have proto-totalitarian spirit creeping in. And all of the most successful pundits, there's a shallowness. And I find that even in the people that are lionized for being deep, they're deep, but there's these shallow flaws. And there's a lack of thoughtfulness, and there's a lack of honesty. There's a lack of intellectual integrity, and there's a lack of carefulness. I think there's prudence, but there's also a sense where you have to have caring, and you have to have deep caring, and you have to say, no, that's going to hurt people. No, we don't want to do this. We don't want to talk this way. We need to be responsible. And the level of irresponsibility is rising. And it's rising at a rate, as I see it in my lifetime. I'm going to pass away. I'm not that young anymore. People who have a certain kind of education, who came from the era before all this digital media, who really had to study in school or actually had to read books, real books, we're passing away. And there's something with Neil Postman and Marshall McLuhan, that the medium is the message, and there comes a deficit, there comes a shallowness that's now playing out, and it's contributing to mass formation. And I don't know if there's any calling a halt to this. I don't know if a war now with Russia is going to interrupt it, and maybe we're going to have something good come out of it. But I generally think we're on a downward trend, and we're lucky when good things come out of things. I think that we're on a downward spiral. What will reverse it? I don't know. Something something mysterious, right? Something above me, what you'd say something providential, someone providential. But it's a very dark moment.
Yeah, I mean, and I know people pick on this, but I think there needs to be prayers. There needs to be solutions, but we need to pray, and we got to lift it up to God, and hopefully He will guide us as a nation, as a people, onto a better path. But I have very deep concerns. We've talked about how our adversaries, both domestic and foreign, on both sides, are just licking their chops, and they're loving every minute of it. We read the quotes by some of the top Russian leaders and intellectuals like Dugin. They are purposely crafting and using words to further incite. They love what's happening, and they want to destroy the United States of America and attain global hegemony. And again, people think we're alarmists. You just have to go and see what their plans are, what's been reported about their plans from defectors, their own documents. And you just go to a variety of different writers and analysts, such as you or Trevor Loudon, myself, and others who I'm probably not listing here. Forgive me if I'm not listing you. And, the facts speak for themselves. And if you're motivated by the continuation of this country's survival as a free nation in perpetuity, the facts speak very loudly. And you're possessed with some, as you said in our last program, a sense of goodness and intellectual integrity and a sense of commitment to decency and human rights and property and all the other things that are important to us, and justice, then these facts speak very loudly and very clearly that we need to rebuild ourselves from within as a nation. More than anything else. I said we're for supporting allies as much as we can within reason, but we have to rebuild the inner layers of this country. And that's going to be a very difficult task. Do I see a leader like that currently? For the most part, no.
No, I don't either. No, that's the sad thing. We have to rebuild our culture, and that's going to take a lot of little battalions of people working hard, finding excellence in that area, and it means swimming against the tide. And I do believe that when things get bad enough, they turn around. When society hits bottom, there is what goes up must come down, but what goes down bounces up at some point. You hit bottom and you have nowhere to go but up. So I think that might be where we're going.
Well, at least that's a little bit of a positive note at the end, so I will give you that.
I suppose it is. It's hope on a diet, as I like to say.
Hope on a diet. That's very clever.
Starve hope a little bit, and it'll go on a diet, and maybe lose some weight, and it'll float up.
Yeah. Jeff, where can people find your materials, your print works, your online works, your other interviews? Go through the list, please.
I have books on Amazon.com. I urge people to buy The Fool and His Enemy is my favorite one. I'm going to be offering on my website, jrnyquist.blog, I'm going to be offering Origins of the Fourth World War. I have a couple hundred copies in my garage, so I think it's time to try to sell those.
Yes.
So I'm going to be putting that out there soon. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on short notice. I think we needed to have this conversation. I think both of our listener readership, I think, will appreciate it. There's a lot that I think we agreed on, and I think this has been a very productive conversation. And, I think, people like us and many other Americans out there, and I like to believe there are a lot of silent Americans out there that are just as distressed as you and I, and maybe they're not on social media. And hopefully at some point people will come to their senses and really take back this country. I hate to use a cliche. So thank you again for joining us. Everybody be good to each other. Let's pray for the future of our country, our people, as well as the world. God bless everyone, and have a good rest of the week. Okay.